Now, stereotypes of this large group of people tell us that most Loyalists probably looked like Thomas Brown, or particularly like Thomas Hutchinson, the subject of Bernard Bailyn's book with which I opened, that they were elite white males, fairly well off, that they had very strong ties to Britain, that they were members of the Anglican Church, and that these Loyalists were invariably Tory, as the term of castigation put it, a term that, of course, is also used to this day as the nickname for the Conservative Party in Britain, that they were Tory in terms of their political disposition, that they were conservatives with a small c. But a Loyalist portrait gallery, I want to suggest to you, would actually feature many different kinds of faces. It would feature the faces of, among others, Thomas Brown, who is not a Thomas Hutchinson. He is not an employee of the British government. He is not especially rich by the standards of the time. He's exactly the kind of figure who's coming to the colonies to make good, as immigrants have always come to the United States. These are faces, the faces of Loyalists, these are faces indicative of the political and social and ethnic spectrum of early America. So this portrait gallery would feature faces like that of Thomas Brown. It would feature faces like that of Joseph Galloway, a Pennsylvanian who was actually a member of the First Continental Congress, a kind of person who felt that, tyranny from the king was not something that he really wanted to deal with, but that there were many other ways forward for the colonies than a complete break. Independence. There were ways forward like, for example, a joint parliament, something that Joseph Galloway, for instance, advanced. The faces in this Loyalist portrait gallery would include the faces of non-whites as well. It would include the faces of figures like Joseph Brant, the Mohawk chieftain from upstate New York, who belonged to a family of Mohawks who had long been affiliated with the British, who had fought with the British, that is, on their side, in the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War, as we call it. The figures among Indians, Mohawks and Creek, for whom, the choice was fairly obvious. If you had a choice between the British, your longtime allies, or the guys who you knew best as the guys who wanted to take your land, then you would tend to go for the British. This Loyalist portrait gallery would finally feature the faces of, if it were a really, really huge portrait gallery, it would feature the faces of 20,000 African Americans. And these were black slaves who, right at the beginning of the Revolution, were courted by the British with the promise that if they joined the British in the American Revolution, they would be rewarded by receiving their freedom. And some 20,000 of these African-American slaves ran to the British. These were slaves, among others, of belonging to Patrick Henry, belonging to Thomas Jefferson, belonging to George Washington. These were people for whom the British promise of liberty, if they agreed to fight with the British, sounded a lot more convincing than the talk of liberty being espoused by their patriot owners who held them enslaved.